Hi there, welcome back here guys. In last lecture we have started working with CSS, we have created our first styling file and we have provided very nice red background. In this lecture we'll be of course improving it. We'll be providing CSS framework which will give us more stylings and more options to style our application. Okay, we can start in our browsers and we can open here a new tab because I need to introduce here two new concepts. In order to work with the new stylings, we need to get some CSS framework that will make our life easier. So we can use Bootstrap CSS, we can use Bulma framework, but what I would like to introduce here especially will be Tailwind CSS framework, which became my very favorite CSS framework. Okay, so let's find here Tailwind CSS. And I can really suggest you to dive into the Tailwind and use it for your applications. It's very easy to plug in and it provides lots of sets of the CSS classes you can use. It has a little bit different approach as with the other CSS frameworks. For example, Bootstrap or Bulma, when they are more focused on the components. Okay, so for example, in Bootstrap, with one class you're able to create entire stylings for a components, but with the Tailwind is a little bit different. It's focused more on utility classes. So if you would like to style your component, basically your HTML, you're providing lots of small classes to your HTML to style the HTML. Okay, so you're providing lots of small CSS classes, which providing small set of the CSS stylings. Maybe you're asking, how is this beneficial? It's beneficial really when you want to make your components reusable. Okay, so you are not constrained to use only one type of a styling, but with these utility classes you can basically create anything. Okay, so you have here a lot of examples on this page what you can use, a lot of components you can use out of the box. Okay, and all the utility classes you'll be able to use in the stylings. All right, and yeah, I highly encourage you to after the lecture just check a documentation. Click here on documentation. Look and see here all the components you can use, all of the customizations you can do, and it's really a lot. And maybe if you decide to work with the future with the Tailwind, there is also components, and you can already get a whole set of the components created by the Tailwind. There is lots of hundreds of components you can use out of the box, and I found their stylings really nice. So yeah. I just tried this Tailwind for my project in this course, and really it became my very favorite one. Okay, but enough of the Tailwind, we would like to first integrate it, and in order to integrate it in our project, we will be using PostCSS. So let's search here also for PostCSS. PostCSS is just a tool, JavaScript tool to transform CSS. Okay, so tool for transforming CSS with JavaScript. Maybe from my other courses are used to that I'm using CSS, less or similar preprocessor. In this course, we'll be using PostCSS, so we are able to write everything in a CSS files. Okay? PostCSS has a little bit different approach in processing CSS files. It's using the purely JavaScript. That's the first thing. And you are able to write all of the modern features in the CSS. Because remember, you're always restricted by the browser runtime. So if the browser doesn't support some CSS features, you're not able to write them. You're not able to use them. But with the PostCSS, we'll be able to write any features we want, okay, in our CSS. And if we will support plugins accordingly, we'll be able to process the CSS also with the modern features. So we'll be able to, for example, chain classes. We'll be able to do these things. Okay, we'll be able to do this and like this, and everything what you're used to do with the other preprocessor, you'll be also able to use in your purely in a CSS. And for that, we'll have this PostCSS. Okay, guys, so I think we'll start integrating this, and then we'll be talking along the lines as we'll be integrating. So first thing, when you want to integrate a Tailwind, you need to install both PostCSS and a Tailwind. Tailwind can behave as a separate framework, but can also behave as a plugin to PostCSS, because the PostCSS has this plugin style architecture where you can provide lots of small software, small applications like a Tailwind, for example, and this will provide more features to your CSS. But you will see it. Okay, so First thing here, let's go to documentation and let's click here installation. In the installation step, let's click here Next.js. It's very simple to install. We just need to install two things for a beginning. We need to install Tailwind and a PostCSS. So let's install these two packages. Let's go to your terminal and let's shut this down, clear it out, and let's run this. By the way, this lecture will be a little bit longer because we need to create a couple of files and this takes time. Okay, what is installing? We need to create two files, PostCSS config and also Tailwind config. So let's go down here and you have these files here. To make sure not make any mistakes, copy the name here, Tailwind config.js. Okay, let's paste it here and create here a new file, Tailwind config.js. And content you can copy from here. I will be talking about these options, all these options later. And let's paste them here. Okay, similarly, let's continue with the PostCSS config. So let's go to our PostCSS config. Let's copy actually first name and then create the file in your file system, new file here. And let's call it PostCSS config.js. Okay, now let's copy the content as previously. All right, and one thing here we need to change. You can see we are using plugin Tailwind. This will work, but the auto prefixer will not work. Okay, because we didn't install auto prefixer plugin, we have just installed Tailwind. And if you are not providing additional configuration to your packages, you can also choose this architecture that you can provide your array of plugins where the plugin you will identify by its name you have installed. So Tailwind CSS, it should be, right? Tailwind CSS, yeah. All right, so now we have these configurations. We are almost done. Let's go back. We can provide additional settings to a poor purge here in the Tailwind configuration. So yeah, let's copy this line. It's very useful. Let's copy it. Let's go to Tailwind Tailwind config.js and let's paste this in the purge. I will format it nicer for you so it's readable. Let me see. Okay, it should be like this rather. Okay, and I will place it on the new lines. So what this basically does is simply to purge, to remove all of the unused stylings. So for example, if you are defining some classes in your CSS files, but you are not using them in your pages or components, then these classes will be purged from the final CSS file. So your file will be in the end smaller. Okay, so here I'm saying, yeah, it's okay to purge unused stylings from the pages and the components folders from all of these files with these extensions, JS, TS, JSX, TSX, the same here. Okay, so let's continue. And now we need to specify here Tailwind stylings. We need to provide actual this large file of all of these utility classes you could see before us. All of these classes we will be using in our pages and the components. So we can do it classically, or we can use the special directives that are defined by the Tailwind. So Tailwind will process them, the special directives, and we will replace them with the actual SCSS classes. And you can see these directives here. Okay, these ones are basic directives for utility classes. So what you can do, you can copy them. All right, and let's go back to Colligator and simply paste them in your main CSS. So here under layout, above layout, let's just simply import your Tailwind base. So this is the Tailwind directive, and with this will be replaced with the actual CSS. Okay. Before you were not able to write such a syntax in CSS, but now with the Tailwind plugin through the PostCSS, we are able to use such a syntax. Okay, I told you we can write a different type of CSS now. Okay, I will show you also output of this file. You will see all these classes on your own eyes. But first, let's try to run it. So we'll see that we will be providing some styling changes. And actually, let's remove layout. We don't need it. Okay, now we can save this, guys. Let's go to terminal. Let's run our projects if they are not running already. And we should see different stylings provided. Okay, now we should see already stylings provided by the Tailwind. So now refresh. I should have here a different font. And yeah, you can see that the font is a little bit larger and also a little bit different type of the font. And this means we have successfully integrated Tailwind. So when I will take a look here, I will inspect the elements. Okay, I should already see here that some CSS has been picked up. So when I will select, let's say this here, body, there should be already some CSS provided from the Tailwind. Okay, so when I will take a look here, there are already some variables defined here, as I can see. Okay, some new family, yeah, new font families, and so on. Okay, so we are already providing the new CSS here. Okay, let me see if I will be able to find it in the sources actually. Okay, let me see if it's part. I think it's actually part of our pages. So pages app.js. Okay, this will be a super huge file, by the way. Okay, actually you don't need to do this because I just want to show you what CSS we are getting generated, but in the end, I think we'll be very successful. Okay, I will show you the CSS actually in the next lecture. We'll be generating it for ourselves, so you will see what CSS we are providing in the end. Okay, I will close it. It's a little bit laggy. These ones are huge files to open like this in a browser. Okay, so let's close it, but you can see here you are providing actually this CSS. And now let's talk a little bit about the type of the architecture we are using. We are using PostCSS and the Tailwind as its plugin. So basically what you have here, I will be drawing this. On the top here, you have actually, I will write like this. You have this PostCSS. You have this PostCSS. Oops, I don't know how to use something like this tool. So PostCSS. PostCSS, okay. And you're supplying your CSS file to it, okay? So you're providing your CSS into its CSS. The file we are writing here, main CSS. I can write here this is a modern CSS because we can provide here more features. This CSS is processed by the PostCSS and it's parsed. It's parsed into something else, into a structure with whom the PostCSS can work with. Okay, so parsed. Parser. It's going to the parser, and the parser will transform the CSS file into some object model, actually in an abstract syntax tree, but you don't need to know what this is, but it's just simply transform it into some structure the PostCSS can work with. Okay, so we have our modern CSS. It's going to PostCSS. The PostCSS will parse it down according to some rules and apply the plugins to it. Okay, so then we have this plugin architecture. So it will go to the Tailwind plugin. So this will be Tailwind. Tailwind. Okay, if you have more plugins, it will go to the other plugins. So plugin 2, let's say, plugin 3. Okay. And then after all this transform, this is a stringified into the final CSS file, stringified. Okay, stringified into the final CSS file. Okay, so we are supplying the CSS with the new features into the PostCSS. It's parsed down into some object that PostCSS understand, and then the plugins are applied, Tailwind, and also other plugins we will plug in, and the final CSS is it's a stringified, and then you have a final CSS file which will be able to be run in your browser, and you will see what CSS we will get in the end. Okay, you will see what CSS we will get. And remember, Tailwind is a framework which provides us with the multiple stylings. Okay, it provides us with this large CSS file of the utility classes we will be able to use in our applications, and also we are able to use these directives and also other directives and other modern syntax that you will see later. Okay, this is just simply unwinding the whole CSS structure into this file. But yeah, I want to show you. This is very hard to explain without the showing actually. And if you want to see the actual explanation of the PostCSS and all of this stuff, you just check the documentation. I highly encourage to just check simply PostCSS, go to its documentation. Okay, and here is the architecture tab, and you can see the architecture explained how this works. And here also workflow. For example, we are providing CSS, it's parsed down to the plugin stringified into the new CSS, and this process is also explained here. Okay, so it's working differently as this preprocessor, for example, SAS or less, which they defined. They define this, their basically custom language and their rules that you can use. The PostCSS is much more flexible. It basically doesn't define any rules. Everything depends on the plugins you will use. And yeah, that should be that. I think I've spent here even more time as I wanted with the CSS. So let's keep this open. Maybe we'll be taking a look here if we need something in the Tailwind. But if you see the new syntax, let's continue next lecture. We'll be providing more settings and we'll be improving it even more. So see you there. Cheers.